So here we go again. Seems like I just did one of these. Thanks to Dylan over at Noble Records. This is Vinyl Tag Quarantine Edition. So lots of interesting questions on this one. I probably could have done this 5 times over and given 5 different answers on each one of them. But I decided to stick with a theme. My theme for this one is basically going to be the road less traveled. I'm going to try and pick not the obvious choices, though there are a couple of obvious choices, but we'll try and throw out some interesting things in there. So let's get into this. I got my questions all written down, and yes, I'm old, so I need my glasses. First question, favorite record from your hometown? I actually come from Buffalo, New York originally. That's not where I'm currently at, but there was a band back in the late 70s and early 80s called Talus. Now, you've probably never heard of Talus. They unfortunately were mismanaged and never hit it big, though they should have. However, one of their band members, the bassist, Billy Sheehan, if you play bass, you've probably heard that name before. He toured with all kinds of bands throughout the 80s and 90s and is well regarded as one of the best bass players of all time. Not necessarily a top 3 or anything, but anybody's list of top 50 for sure, top 20 probably, top 10 maybe. But yeah, Talus. It's a pretty straightforward rock band, late 70s type feel to it, and I'd recommend it if you've never checked them out. Try and stream some of their songs. It's actually pretty good, and you can pick up their albums pretty cheap if you can find them. An album you highly recommend? Lots of them, but I'll make it easy and I'll go to an old standby. Mezzanine. I don't care what genre you listen to, just pick this up. I'm not even going to tell you what it is. If you don't know what it is, you need to find out what it is. So, quick and easy on that one. A tip for beginners. This one comes up constantly, and it amazes me how many people don't know what the hell's going on. This is sort of a 2-in-1, and basically it's cleaning and static, especially over the winter. Now, I post on the subreddit Vinyl constantly. There's a weekly questions thread where you can ask your questions, and people are always asking, what should I do about static? I went out and I got one of these carbon fiber brushes. It's advertised as anti-static. Well, it's anti-static only in the sense that it's neutral. It won't introduce new static onto the record, but it doesn't do anything for existing static on the record. Not only that, it doesn't clean. This dusts. Very light dusting, but this doesn't clean your records. If you want to get rid of static and properly clean your records, go for a vinyl style deep groove record washing system. I have a whole video on my channel, which I'll probably redo because it's pretty potato quality, or a spin clean, or a nitty gritty, or an ultrasonic, or whatever. I mean, you can spend thousands of dollars, or you can spend like $60 if you dig hard enough. But wet washing your records in some form or another is going to eliminate static, and it's going to get into the record and actually clean the gunk out. And once you've cleaned it, then you can use one of these just to do a light dusting. And to be honest, I'm not positive this does anything. The only thing I use this for is cat hair. Other than that, it's my drawer. I never use the damn thing. First record that got me into deeper music. This is actually, there's a lot of records that have sent me down various rabbit holes. But early on, one of the first records was this one right here. My older brother actually had this on 8-track, and it was the first quote-unquote prog record that I'd ever heard. This is Peter Gabriel's debut album after he had left Genesis, and I listened to it, and it just had bizarre lyrics and bizarre time signatures and sounds, you know, Moribund the Burgermeister and some other things like that. And I was already big into Genesis. I'm a child of the 80s. Of course, I know Genesis, so I listened to lots of that. And here's Peter Gabriel, one of the original members. And I started going down that rabbit hole. And it got me into progressive rock. It got me into Frank Zappa. All kinds of interesting things. And the biggest thing was it didn't it wasn't for the music that it introduced me to, it was the mindset that it introduced me to. It's these kind of things. Music can be so much more than the junk that you're hearing on the radio. There's so much more to it, and there's so many other interesting things that you can explore. And that really opened me up. All right, I feel like I'm rushing, and I don't want to rush, but I know my videos are always 25 minutes long. But I'm going to take my time. So, an obscure record people may not know about. Very difficult, but lately I've been into this one. This is Dave Pike, Jazz for the Jet Set. This is early 1960s space jazz. There's a lot better, probably, but this particular one just has the right interesting mix. Dave Pike is actually one of those early jazz artists from the late 50s and early to mid 60s. He plays vibraphone, which is a little unusual to begin with. There's other big artists on here. Herbie Hancock plays organ, which Herbie Hancock normally doesn't play. But it has just the right amount of jazziness to it. It has just the right amount of cheese to it. It's just sort of a snapshot in time of the early 1960s. It seems like it would fit perfectly in an Austin Powers movie. It's a little cheesy, but it's just the right groove, and it's actually really cool. I recommend streaming that one. Don't go out and buy the album because they're not cheap. I happen to find that one in a thrift store for $1. But definitely recommend that you listen to that one. A group you collect all of their records. Now, I'm not going to pull out the whole pile, and there's a couple of things that I could have gone with, but I recognized as I was trying to think about this question, I'm not a completist, but I have a lot of different groups. But Pink Floyd, I don't care if it's a foreign release with a different combination of songs on it that isn't available anywhere else. I don't care if it's a bootleg. I don't care if it's one of their studio albums. I see Pink Floyd, I buy Pink Floyd. And I don't care what it is. A lot of other albums, I'll just buy the studios or something like that. But Floyd, I'll buy. If I come across a bootleg somewhere in a store, I immediately purchase it. Doesn't matter what it is. I am more on Pink Floyd later because that's going to pop up again. Band whose second album is better than their first. This kind of came to me pretty quickly, and it's almost cheating because the second album and the band itself, the members of the band itself, were very different on the second album than on the first album. So the first album, unfortunately I don't have an original, but I do have one of these. And that's the Moody Blues. You listen to their first album, it's kind of bubblegum pop. They had a top 10 hit on their first album, and they were doing that mid 1960s kind of bubblegum pop and stuff. But this, I won't say it's better because it's so different. It's an apples and oranges comparison. But Moody Blues, Days of Future Past, is an absolute masterpiece and launched their entire progressive rock career. And they've come out with some amazing stuff over the years. So that's not necessarily a better second album. That's an entire transformation of the band. Let's see here. Whack-A-Mole. All right. So I'm going to do this legit. I'm not going to sit here and try and reach back on my collection because, to be honest, I know where everything's stored. So if I reach back, I know where I'm going. So I am going to go into my Discogs, and I'm going to do all right, hold on a second. All right, so I just went and pulled it. What it came up with was Julie London, Love on the Rocks. Now, if you're not familiar with this particular album of Julie London, you're probably familiar with this one. This is late 50s, early 60s. Love on the Rocks is actually from 1962. This is sort of your blonde bombshell lounge singer type, you know, sort of sultry voice, sexy, that was very prevalent back in those days. You know, think Frank Sinatra or somebody kind of hanging out in a lounge and big piano and beautiful singer comes out. Julie London, however, was one of the best of her day, and she was actually talented, not just a beautiful woman. And if you're not familiar with Julie London as a singer, if you're of a certain age, you may remember her as the head nurse Julie from the TV series ER. Long before that, she was a very famous singer, sold millions of copies. That particular album I haven't heard yet. I actually just picked it up from a thrift store a few weeks ago, and I haven't gotten around to it yet. Her first one that I had showed you, Julie Is Her Name, which is one of her more famous ones. I listen to that on a fairly regular basis, to be honest. It invokes a particular mood, shall we say. All right, so that's my whack-a-mole. What album have you listened to most in your life? This particular album, there's a few, but this one has always been around and has always come back around. And it's probably the album that I listen to critically the most, because it seems like every time I listen to this album, I pick up something new that I hadn't noticed the first time around. It's also become my album for testing new equipment. When I upgrade, one of the first albums I'll ever play on upgraded equipment is this one, to see if there's any new detail that I hadn't heard before. And I gotta tell you, I've done it several times, I've upgraded several times, and every single time new detail appears. Things that I had never noticed before. And this might be a little cliche, but it's Pink Floyd's The Wall. I actually own 3 copies of it. I never thought I was going to be that guy to own multiple copies of an album, but I have an original US version, I have an import Japanese from back in the day, and I have the new remastered version. And each one of them's different. And just as a little side note, this is the worst one of them. The new remasters, nope, not impressed at all. Not impressed at all. The original US copy that I have is by far the best. Anyways, a little extra information. So, what do we got next? Show an album with a crazy story. Now, my original thought to that question was, is there a crazy story about the album itself? Meaning from the musician's standpoint or from the record label standpoint. But the way that Dylan had done his, it was an acquisition story. It's that specific piece of vinyl and how it came into my possession. And to be honest, most of my stuff's pretty boring. I go to estate sales, I go to garage sales, I go to record stores. I kind of collect everything on the up and up. But there was one that stood out. It's not particularly interesting necessarily. This is Karin Dalton's second album. This is an original. But I was, early on in my collecting days, I used to go to all the thrift stores. And I took a day one time and decided that I was going to go to all of the various thrift stores out in the rural areas of where I live. I'm in Tampa. So I sat down for a couple of days, drew out a map, and found all the different places, and spent a day driving around. And I went to, that day, probably 9 different thrift stores. Didn't find anything. I absolutely had a complete bust of a day. On the way back, to go down to the main road to get back onto the highway to get me back home, I had to drive down this one road, and I was hungry. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon at this point. I hadn't eaten anything all day. I was dehydrated, I was tired, I was frustrated because I hadn't seen anything. And as I'm driving by on the opposite side of the road, there's a truck with a trailer and a big, huge barbecue smoker, and he was selling barbecue. And I had the highway in sight from me, but I caught that place, and I'm like, you know what? I went up to the light, I did a U-turn, went over there, and I said, I'm hungry. What do you got? Got myself some barbecue. I said, you got anything to drink? Because I'm thirsty as hell. And he said, no, you got to go into the store here. And it's just this little tiny shack. It just looks like a little mini mart out in the middle of nowhere for the rural population. And I walk in there to get something to drink. And it turns out it's a little bit of a local thrift store. They had various DVDs and movies and stuff like that. And I looked around a little bit and I found a box that had some vinyl records in it. I started flipping through. I saw this. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was different. I knew the label, sort of. But I pulled it out. I didn't have any cell service. And it was only $1. And I said, well, what the hell? So I brought it home. The cover's got a little bit of markings on it. There's some white that's showing, but overall there's no major marks. So I mean, this is a solid VG+. The record itself is, I don't even think it's ever been played, and it actually comes in a poly sleeve. Turns out this is highly collectible. If you are a Bob Dylan fan, you probably know her because she hung around in that group. Bob Dylan said that she was the best singer that he had ever known. So I looked up the value of it and was pretty shocked and decided to play it and was highly disappointed, to be honest. I don't know what Bob Dylan was smoking back in the day, but he can send some of that my way because, yeah, I don't like it. I definitely don't like it. Anyways. That was just kind of a luck find. I was actually out intentionally going to rural thrift stores. Happened to pull into a rural thrift store that I didn't know that's what it was, and found one of the more valuable records in my entire collection, in beautiful condition. My collecting pet peeve. There's a few, but there's one that I haven't heard on anyone else's video that really stuck out to me. And one of the things that will, in this day and age, now I live in an area of riches. Within, I don't know, 40 miles of my house, there's 17 record stores. Legitimate storefront record stores. Plus the usual couple of booths at your local flea markets and stuff. 17. And I'll tell you, if I walk into a record store, and their bins are packed so freaking tight that I can't flip through without actually bending the record over to get a little bit of a clearance to be able to try and see what the title is, I just walk out. I won't even waste my time. I'm not even going to spend my time there. Record store owners, for God's sake, make it easy for us. Unless you have a gigantic, and I mean gigantic selection. If you've got 50,000 records on your floor and you want to pack them tight, then you've become a destination location for somebody that's looking for something specific. And they'll come in and they'll deal with that. But for the casual browser, I'm just turning away. I'm not even bothering shopping at your store. Not going to do it. Sorry. An album or genre people would be surprised that I like. I got to tell you, I listen to so much music and so many different genres. My friends who know me would not be surprised by anything, to be honest. I have a very eclectic palette. But I think there's one thing that people would be a little bit shocked by. Now, back in my college days, I was a human jukebox. I won't say DJ because DJ since then has taken on a different meaning. But I was a DJ at a bar, not a club, not a dance hall, but at a bar. And yes, I played mostly classic rock and whatever people were looking for. But every once in a while, you gotta kick it up a notch. So I started playing some synth pop dance songs, you know, New Shoes and some Delight. Some CC Music Factory, you know, Ace of Base. Oh, love Ace of Base. And I gotta tell you, I'm really into that synth pop dance stuff. You know, Aqua and all of these. I don't tolerate it. I like it. These are, when I'm in the mood, my neighbors are not happy because I crank it up and kick out some nice synth pop dance moves. All right, moving on. I won't dwell on that one. A record from the year you were born. I was born in 1969. Do you have any idea how much good music was released in 1969? Hell, I have 2 Led Zeppelin albums. Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 were both released in 1969. Space Oddity, David Bowie. So much. But keeping with the theme of road less traveled, I'm going to go for something a little bit off the wall. The Bee Gees, Odessa. Now, everybody knows the Bee Gees from Saturday Night Fever. They think they're one of the greatest disco bands of all time. But prior to that, the Bee Gees were in contention with the Beatles. They had all the right sounds, they had all the right talent, they had everything going for them. But the only problem was they were from Australia. And they just didn't have the backing. They didn't have the marketing machine. They didn't have what was needed to overcome the hump. And I wouldn't say they struggled, but they kind of struggled for a lot of years. They should have been a lot bigger. If you're a Beatles fan and you're not familiar with this album, you should give this album a listen. You'd be surprised. If you like early Beatles, this sounds exactly like early Beatles. I'll throw it on every once in a while, and my friends will ask me, it's like, what is this, a Lost Beatles album or something? What the hell is this? Now, I don't have the felt covered. I've been looking for one, but every one that I ever come across is in crappy condition. So I have this one, but the Bee Gees' Odessa, to me, is an interesting album from the year I was born. In a year full of great music, legendary stuff. Show a 10-inch and or your thoughts on 10 inches. So for me, I have 2 10-inch records. One is an obscure krautrock. The only other one I have is Kid A. If you're not familiar, Radiohead released all of their albums on a double 10-inch. I actually had this in my Vinyl Tag 2020. But this is one of only 2 10-inch records that I have. I don't necessarily have a problem with the format. I have a problem with the storage of it. I need 2 10-inch sleeves right now, inners and outers, but you can only buy them in packs of 25. I'm not going to order a pack of 25 sleeves to try and fit the damn thing in there. As far as storing them on the shelf, well, again, it doesn't fit with everything else that I have. It's a very inconvenient format. And not only that, but you lose the outer 2 inches of groove, which is the highest fidelity part of the record. Back in the 1970s, during the oil shortage, when vinyl was very, very expensive, the 10 inches would make sense. In this day and age, there's no reason for it. You know what? Space out the grooves, give it a hotter cut, and go with a freaking 12-inch like everyone else does. There's no room for it anymore. I don't like it. Share an interesting fact or story about an album or song. This is going to be a quick one, because it's real easy. The actual album is Cold Fact by Rodriguez, or Coming From Reality, a second one. But basically, if you don't know the story of Searching for Sugar Man, what I will tell you is don't Google it, don't look it up, don't know anything about it. Find the movie, the documentary. This won the 2013 Oscar for Best Documentary. And I will also say it's not just for music lovers. So get your significant other, get your kids, get whomever happens to be sitting around the house and you're looking for something to watch some night, right here. You want an interesting story? That's the ultimate interesting story. And I'm not going to tell you a damn thing about it, so go look it up. Show an album with an animal. Well, duh. Okay. Somebody had to do this one. It's low-hanging fruit. Somebody had to do the bad dad joke. The bad dad joke. The Animals. All right. But seriously, I have quite a bit of a collection of Camel, and I have always loved this particular image. This is Camel, which is on many of their covers, but it's Moon Madness. So there he is in an Apollo freaking spacesuit on the moon. Nothing better than a camel in a spacesuit. Pretty freaking hilarious. Next question. Show an album with crazy artwork. This was an easy pick for me. This was a real easy pick for me, to be honest, because I have a very unique album. And I'm going to say this has crazy artwork, and you're going to look at me like, what the hell are you talking about? Right here. You're like, what? Looks like TV static. No, this is Cassadaga Bright Eyes. Yeah, there's a couple different versions. One of them actually has some album artwork. But on the inside, it comes with this decoder piece, so that you can actually see what's going on in the static. And I seriously doubt... Oh, hey, it is going to show up. It doesn't show up too well in the camera, but you slide this around and this will show you the actual artwork in the static with your special decoder piece. I thought that was very unique and very interesting. Definitely a one-off. I have never seen anyone else do it. That's some crazy artwork. Show an album you can find for cheap. Again, I'm gonna go with Road Less Traveled, because there's a ton of them. And I'm going to go with one that's probably not as well known. And that's the Smiths. And no, not the Smiths, but the Smiths. Here's another band that should have been a lot bigger than they were. But this particular album is actually not that difficult to find. Any decent-sized record store, they probably have a copy floating around somewhere. You can get it pretty cheap. You'll find it at dollar bins all over the place if you know where to look. They are, if you like Carole King Tapestry, this is definitely along that same vein. And Carole King Tapestry is another one that you can find cheap that's really good. The singer is absolutely phenomenal. The band is like every other band around that time. The singer is phenomenal. Their songs are great. It's like Carole King, where half of them are covers and half of them are original. They didn't really go on to do a whole lot, though they should have. She's absolutely fantastic. So look for the Smiths. And let's see. This one was difficult. The next question is, show an album with an acquired taste. Now, I listen to a lot of progressive rock. I listen to a lot of scores. I listen to some krautrock and some metal stuff. But I think for me, one of the oddest ones is listening to... And of course, Brian Eno is the one who really pioneered this. And that's ambient music. I should have more of these. I don't know where my other ones went. I have like 3 more of these. And it's not an acquired taste to listen to, because it's supposed to be background music, but it's an acquired taste to give a critical listening to. And I actually like critically listening to this stuff to figure out how he did what he did. Because the entire purpose of this song is to not have a melody, to not have a beat, and to make it sound just like background music, but to sit down and critically listen to that to figure out how on earth is he doing this? You know, what is it? What is he doing that it flows and it's not just staggered out and it's not so obvious that he's trying not to create a melody or not to create a beat to it? And I find this to be fascinating, and it's an acquired taste to have the patience to sit down and listen to something like that, because it's background music, you know. you're not actually supposed to listen to it. It's just supposed to be playing, but it was done very intentionally. So I find that absolutely fascinating. And last question: show your most recent find. Find to me is not just my recent acquisition, but my latest find happens to be my latest acquisition. It's a band called Zoid. Zoid, Mid to late 80s. I think they stretched possibly into the early 90s a little bit. They're a band out of Syracuse. And again, this is one of those ones that probably should have gone a lot farther if they had the right management. But think Van Halen, 1980s Van Halen. If you like that, you'll like these guys. Pretty obscure, but they were huge regional local band. They were on the college circuit for a while. I actually saw these guys live back when I was in college. And their records are pretty rare, and it's pretty hard to come by them. So I was very happy to acquire this one. So that is Vinyl Tag Quarantine Edition. What I will say is I hope you are all staying safe. Please, please, please. I was actually forced into a position of having to go to the grocery store today, which is the first time in like a couple of weeks. For other people's sake, please wear a mask. The mask isn't going to protect you, but it's going to protect other people. Don't be that a-hole. Wear a mask. Do the right thing. Keep your social distancing. Keep other people in your community safe by following the protocols. It may never affect you, but it could affect somebody else. Don't be that guy. And until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.